An older Hollywood producer crossed a line with a young actress on set. People saw it. People heard it. And when it finally reached Clint Eastwood, he didn't argue. He said 5 words that ended the man's career. This happened in the early 1990s during production on a major studio film, on a set where discipline and professionalism were non-negotiable. At the time, Clint Eastwood wasn't just another actor-director. He was one of the few people in Hollywood who could walk onto a set and instantly set the tone, without raising his voice, without posturing, without reminding anyone who he was. By then, Clint had spent decades building a reputation that mattered to the people who actually made movies work. He respected budgets, he respected schedules, and most of all, he respected the crew. Studios trusted him because his films came in on time and under control. Crew members trusted him because he didn't waste their days. Actors trusted him because he ran sets where the rules were clear and enforced evenly. Clint didn't believe in chaos as a creative tool. He believed that if people felt safe, focused, and respected, the work would be better and faster. His productions were known for being calm, almost quiet. No screaming matches, no ego-driven delays, no power plays disguised as creative tension. When Clint directed, things moved. Scenes were planned in advance. Days finished when they were supposed to, and people went home knowing they hadn't been dragged through unnecessary drama. That discipline wasn't about control for control's sake. It was about fairness. Film sets are complicated machines. Hundreds of people coordinating movement, light, sound, performance, and timing, often in tight windows that can't be recreated once they're gone. When one person decided their comfort mattered more than everyone else's time, the entire system broke down. Clint understood that better than most. That's why his sets were known as places where people could work without constantly looking over their shoulder, where assistants weren't afraid to speak, where younger actors weren't treated like disposable pieces, which is exactly why what happened on this set stood out. Because this wasn't a chaotic production. This wasn't a loose environment where lines blurred easily. This was a disciplined set, run by someone who paid attention. And the person who crossed the line wasn't some anonymous crew member. It was a producer, someone powerful enough to think the rules didn't apply to him. The producer wasn't famous in the way actors were famous. His name didn't appear on posters. He didn't do interviews. Most audiences wouldn't have recognized him if he walked past them on the street, but inside the industry, his name carried weight. He'd been around for decades, worked on respected projects, built relationships that mattered, with studios, financiers, and other producers who decided which films moved forward and which didn't. He was considered old school, the kind of person who'd been in Hollywood long enough to outlast trends, scandals, and people who made noise without power. On set, his authority wasn't loud, it was assumed. Crew members didn't question him. Assistants deferred automatically, and younger actors were quietly advised to stay polite, stay agreeable, and not cause problems. Not because anyone explicitly told them to, but because everyone understood how the system worked. Producers didn't just oversee budgets and schedules, they influenced future jobs. They made calls, they remembered names. If you were a crew member, speaking up meant risking your reputation. If you were an actress early in your career, it meant risking something worse. So when behavior crossed into uncomfortable territory, it often didn't turn into a confrontation. It turned into silence. People noticed things. People talked quietly. But no one wanted to be the first person to turn a feeling into an accusation, especially not against someone who'd survived in Hollywood as long as this producer had. On paper, he was there to keep the production running smoothly, to coordinate departments, to solve problems before they reached the director. And for the most part, he did exactly that, which made the moments that followed harder to ignore, because they weren't coming from someone careless or inexperienced. They were coming from someone who knew exactly where the lines were and how far he could push without being challenged. At first, the moments were small enough that they didn't interrupt filming, small enough that no one called cut, small enough that people could convince themselves they were overthinking it, a comment that lingered a little too long, a joke that landed wrong and wasn't corrected, a hand placed on a shoulder that didn't move when it should have. Nothing explosive, nothing that would stop a production, but enough that people noticed. A camera assistant caught someone's eye across the set and raised an eyebrow. A makeup artist went suddenly quiet. Someone found a reason to step away. The actress handled it the way people often do when they're not sure how much power they actually have. She smiled when it didn't feel natural. She laughed when the moment didn't call for it. She stayed professional and kept working. That's how these situations survive their first appearance. Not because they're invisible, but because they're deniable. People start offering explanations. He's from a different generation. That's just how he talks. He doesn't mean anything by it. And because the producer kept doing his job, checking schedules, giving notes, keeping things moving, it was easy to let those explanations stand. No one wanted to be the person who overreacted. No one wanted to be wrong, especially on a set this big, especially with someone this established. So the set kept working, and the moments kept happening. Nothing dramatic enough to force a decision. Nothing clear enough to demand intervention. Just a growing awareness that something felt off. By the end of the day, people weren't debating whether it had happened. They were debating whether it was serious enough to say something, and most of them decided to wait. The second incident didn't pass quietly. It happened between setups, in a pocket of time where people were close enough to hear, but not close enough to pretend they hadn't. The producer leaned in while the actress was waiting to be called back to set, close enough that she had to shift her weight, close enough that stepping away felt like making a scene. He said something under his breath. Whatever it was, her expression changed immediately. She stopped smiling, stopped laughing, took a step back. He didn't. A nearby crew member froze, not because they didn't know it was wrong, but because they didn't know what the right move was. Step in and risk escalation, say something and become part of it? Another crew member suddenly found something urgent to adjust. When the producer finally moved away, the actress didn't say a word. She walked off the set and didn't return for several minutes. That's when people started talking. Not loudly, not formally, sideways. Someone mentioned it to a department head. A department head mentioned it to an assistant. An assistant asked a careful question that wasn't really a question at all. By the end of the afternoon, most of the set knew something had happened, even if no one was using precise language to describe it. And the mood changed. People were more alert, more watchful, less willing to explain things away. This wasn't about an awkward joke anymore. This wasn't about tone or generational misunderstanding. This was behavior. Still, no one confronted the producer directly, not because they didn't believe the actress, but because they understood what confronting him might cost. So the set finished the day the way it always did. Cameras rolling, scenes completed, professionalism intact on the surface. But underneath it, something had shifted. The question wasn't whether it would happen again. The question was who would finally say something, and to whom. It didn't reach Clint as a confrontation. It reached him as information. Late that afternoon, someone from the production team asked if they could speak to him privately. Not on set, not in front of anyone, just a few steps away, where voices didn't carry. The man was careful with his words. He didn't accuse. He didn't dramatize. He explained what had been seen, what had been heard, and how uncomfortable it had made people who were trying to do their jobs. He mentioned the actress by name. He mentioned witnesses. And he made one thing clear. This isn't a one-off. Clint listened without interrupting. No reaction, no visible anger. When the man finished, Clint asked a single question. Has it happened more than once? Yes, the man said. There was a pause. We can handle it quietly, he added. A conversation, a warning, HR, whatever you think makes sense. Clint didn't answer right away. He looked back toward the set, toward people still working, toward a production that hadn't stopped moving. Let's see what happens tomorrow, he said. No threats, no speeches, just a decision. It wasn't hesitation. It was confirmation. Clint believed in acting on facts, not rumors, not impressions. And if someone was going to be removed from a set, it wouldn't be because of panic or optics. It would be because the line was clear. And if that line was crossed again, there would be no discussion. Clint didn't call attention to what had just happened. He didn't gather the crew. He didn't explain himself. He turned to the production manager and gave instructions the same way he always did. Calmly, efficiently. Have security walk him out, he said. Remove his name from the call sheet. Then he looked back toward the set. We'll adjust, he added. Move to the next setup. And just like that, the day continued. Cameras were repositioned. Lighting was reset. Actors were called back to places they'd been standing minutes earlier. The crew worked, not because they were ignoring what had happened, but because that's what professionals do when leadership is clear. The producer didn't get a second conversation. He didn't get to explain his intent. He didn't get to negotiate a quiet exit. He was escorted off the lot without an audience. By lunchtime, everyone on set knew. By the end of the day, people outside the production knew too. Not because anyone leaked a story, but because Hollywood is small, and sudden absences get noticed. A name disappearing from a project mid-shoot raises questions. Meetings get canceled. Calls go unanswered. The studio backed the decision immediately. There were witnesses. There was no confusion about what had happened. The producer's career didn't end with headlines or a press release. It ended the way most Hollywood careers do, silently. Projects stopped coming. Introductions dried up. People who used to return calls didn't. Within months, his name wasn't attached to anything new. Within a year, it was as if he'd never been there at all. The actress stayed on the film. She finished her work. The production wrapped without further incident. And the set moved on. Lighter, quieter, more focused than it had been before. Years later, when Clint Eastwood was asked about the incident, he didn't frame it as a confrontation. He didn't call it bravery. He didn't call it a stand. He described it the same way he described most directing decisions, as responsibility. A film set, Clint said, isn't just a place where scenes get shot. It's a place where hundreds of people are working under pressure, often for long hours, relying on each other to do their jobs without fear or distraction. When someone abuses their position on a set, it doesn't stay contained. It changes how people move, how they speak, how safe they feel doing their work. And when that happens, the job of the director isn't to negotiate. It's to protect the set. The crew members who were there remember it the same way. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, no speech meant for witnesses. Just 5 words delivered calmly. And then the work continued. That's why the moment became legendary. Not because it was loud, but because it was final. On a Clint Eastwood set, power doesn't give you cover. History doesn't buy you patience. And talent, no matter how valuable, never excuses misconduct. That line only gets crossed once. And when it does, there's no argument. There's just the door.